social worker arrived at my door with files and said, "We need to discuss your husband's other 3 children in the foster system." The manila folder in her hands was thick, stuffed with papers that had colored tabs sticking out at irregular intervals, and when she said the word children, my brain simply stopped processing language. I stood in my doorway at 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, still wearing my work clothes from the law office where I spent my days organizing estate planning documents, and stared at this woman with her county ID badge and her serious expression and her folder full of what appeared to be my husband's secret life. "I'm sorry," I said, because those were the only words my mouth could form. "I think you have the wrong house." She checked the address on her phone, then looked at the numbers on our front door, then back at me with an expression that was professional sympathy mixed with something that looked like pity. "You're Mrs. Holloway? Married to Michael Holloway? Date of birth March 15th, 1985? I nodded, and she held up the folder. "Then I'm at the right house. I'm Veronica Hayes, Child Protective Services Supervisor with 18 years in Family Services. May I come in? This conversation really shouldn't happen on your front porch." I'd been married to Michael for 5 years, together for 7 total, and I thought I knew everything about him. We'd met at a friend's barbecue when I was 26 and he was 29, both of us at that age where everyone kept asking when we'd settle down and start families. He was charming in this low-key way that felt genuine, funny without trying too hard, and he'd listened when I talked about my work and my dreams and my anxieties about the future. Our relationship had progressed naturally through dating to moving in together to a proposal on a beach in Oregon that felt romantic without being over the top. He worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled occasionally for conferences, made decent money that combined with my paralegal salary meant we could afford a modest 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools for the kids we planned to have someday. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable and stable and building toward a future that felt solid. He'd told me about his past relationships in vague terms, mentioned an ex-girlfriend from college who'd broken his heart, talked about learning from past mistakes, but nothing that raised red flags. He'd said he'd never been married before, never had kids, was ready to start fresh with me. And I'd believed him because why wouldn't I? People don't usually lie about having children. That's not the kind of thing you can just hide. Veronica Hayes sat on my cream-colored couch, the same couch Michael and I had picked out together at a furniture store after debating for an hour about whether cream was too impractical, and she opened the folder with careful precision. "I want to start by saying that this information is probably going to be shocking and difficult to process," she began, using the tone of someone who'd delivered terrible news many times before. "The 3 children in question are Lily Holloway, age 8, Noah Holloway, age 10, and Sophie Holloway, age 6. They've been in the foster care system for approximately 3 years, placed there after their mother, Rachel Winters, lost custody due to substance abuse issues. Your husband is listed as the biological father on all 3 birth certificates." She pulled out photocopies and slid them across my coffee table. I picked up the first one with hands that had started shaking and saw Michael's name printed in careful letters under father. The document was dated 10 years ago, issued in a county about 2 hours north of where we lived. The second was 8 years old, the third 6 years old. 3 children, 3 birth certificates, all listing my husband as the father. All from before I'd even met him. My mouth was dry, and when I tried to speak, the words came out wrong. There must be a mistake. Michael would have told me. He couldn't just not mention having 3 children. Veronica's expression was patient but firm. "I understand this is difficult to accept. However, we've confirmed his identity through multiple sources. He's been making child support payments through wage garnishment for the past 7 years, since before the children entered foster care. The payments are automatically deducted from his paycheck, which is likely why you haven't noticed." She pulled out more documents, financial records showing monthly deductions of $1,400 for child support, payments that had been coming out of Michael's paycheck since before we'd even started dating. I thought about our joint bank account, how we'd combined finances after we got married, how I handled most of our bill paying and budgeting. I'd never seen a deduction for child support because Michael's paycheck went into his personal checking account first, then he'd transfer his share of our monthly expenses to the joint account. I'd never questioned why he kept a separate account. Lots of couples maintained some financial independence, but now I was staring at proof that his financial independence had been covering up $1,400 monthly payments to support children I didn't know existed. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than intended. "If he's paying child support, if the kids are in foster care, what does this have to do with me?" Veronica shifted slightly, and I saw her grip tighten on the folder. "The children's caseworker has been trying to contact your husband for 6 months regarding permanency planning. The state is moving toward terminating parental rights because Rachel is unlikely to regain custody, and we need to determine if Mr. Holloway wants to pursue custody or if the children should be adopted out. He hasn't responded to any letters, phone calls, or emails. His employer confirmed his contact information is current, which led us to his home address, your address." She paused, letting that sink in. "The children know their father exists. They've asked about him, and we need to inform him that he has 30 days to make a decision about their future, or the state will proceed with termination of his parental rights, and the children will be placed for adoption." I felt my chest tighten because this meant Michael hadn't just hidden his children's existence from me. He'd been actively ignoring them, refusing to respond to the state, letting them sit in foster care while he built a new life with me. I called Michael immediately after Veronica left, not even waiting for her car to pull out of our driveway. He answered on the third ring with his usual casual greeting. "Hey babe, what's up? I'm just finishing a meeting. Should be home around 6. I cut him off before he could say more. "A social worker just left our house. She had files about your 3 children in foster care. I need you to come home right now and explain what the hell is going on." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 5 seconds, and in that silence I heard everything I needed to know. If he'd been confused or shocked, he would have responded immediately with questions. The pause meant he was calculating, deciding how to play this, figuring out his next move. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted from casual to careful. "I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like. Just don't do anything or talk to anyone until I get there, okay? I'll leave right now." He hung up before I could respond, and I stood in my kitchen holding my phone and wondering who the hell I'd married. He walked through the door 38 minutes later, which meant he'd been speeding on the highway, and his face had that expression people get when they know they're caught but are still hoping they can talk their way out. "Let me explain," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. 3 children. You have 3 children, with a woman named Rachel Winters, children who are in foster care. Children you've been paying child support for since before we met. Start talking and do not lie to me because I have documentation for all of this." Michael sat down heavily in the armchair across from me and rubbed his face with both hands. "I should have told you," he said, which was possibly the most inadequate statement I'd ever heard. "It happened when I was young, early 20s. Rachel and I were together on and off for years. It was toxic. We broke up and got back together constantly. She got pregnant with Noah, then we tried to make it work and she got pregnant with Lily, then again with Sophie. But she had problems, addiction issues, mental health stuff. I couldn't handle it. After Sophie was born, I left. I moved down here, started over, tried to forget about it." "Tried to forget about your 3 children," I repeated slowly, making sure I understood correctly. He flinched at my tone but kept going. "I paid child support, every month, exactly what the court ordered. But I couldn't be around Rachel, couldn't watch her destroy herself, and the kids were always caught in the middle. When they went into foster care 3 years ago, I thought it was better for them to have a fresh start without me dragging Rachel's drama into their lives." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You thought it was better to abandon them completely? To not respond when the state reached out about custody? To let them think their father didn't want them?" He stood up, pacing now. "You don't understand what it was like. Rachel would use the kids to manipulate me, would threaten to keep them from me if I didn't give her money or attention. It was constant chaos. I couldn't live like that anymore. And when I met you, when I had a chance at a normal life, I didn't want to drag you into that mess." The word mess echoed in my head. He'd called his children a mess. He'd looked at me, at our life together, at our future plans, and decided his existing children were too complicated to mention. "You lied to me," I said, and my voice came out flat and emotionless. "For 7 years, you lied every single day. You told me you'd never had children. You let me think we'd be starting a family together as first-time parents. You watched me talk about wanting kids someday while you already had 3 in foster care." Michael's face shifted from defensive to pleading. "I didn't know how to tell you. At first it didn't seem important because we'd just started dating. Then it felt too late, like telling you would mean losing you. I kept thinking I'd find the right time, but there was never a right time. And honestly, I'd compartmentalized it so completely that sometimes I almost forgot about it myself. I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth." I looked at this man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years, who I'd made breakfast for and planned vacations with and built a life with, and realized I didn't know him at all. The Michael I thought I knew wouldn't abandon his children. The Michael I thought I knew wouldn't lie about something this fundamental. But the real Michael, the one sitting in front of me making excuses, apparently could do both of those things without losing sleep. I called a divorce attorney the next morning. Catherine Strauss had 23 years of experience in family law and a reputation for being ruthless when necessary. Her office was downtown in one of those renovated historic buildings with exposed brick and too much natural light, and when I walked in at 9 a.m., she took one look at my face and offered coffee before we even started talking. I gave her the full story, showed her the documents Veronica had left with me, explained about the hidden child support and the lies and the casual way Michael had described abandoning his 3 children. Catherine listened without interrupting, taking notes in neat handwriting on a legal pad. And when I finished, she sat back in her chair and said, "Well, this is going to be ugly, but at least you have documentation." She explained that discovering undisclosed children and financial deception were grounds for fault-based divorce in our state, that the hidden child support payments meant Michael had been lying about his income and expenses throughout our marriage, and that I had a strong case for both divorce and a favorable financial settlement. "But first," she said, pulling out her phone, "we need to talk about those children." That statement caught me off guard. What about them? I mean, they're not my responsibility. I didn't even know they existed until yesterday. Catherine's expression was carefully neutral. Legally, you're correct. But morally and practically, there's a situation here that's going to impact your divorce proceedings. Those kids have a father who's been ignoring them, and the state is going to terminate his parental rights if he doesn't respond. Once that happens, any potential future obligations he might have had disappear. But if you want to use his abandonment of these children as evidence of his character in divorce proceedings, we need him to actually engage with the situation first. She leaned forward. What I'm saying is, before the state terminates his rights, you might want to consider pushing him to at least meet these kids, to acknowledge them, to create a paper trail of his choices. Because right now, he can claim he was young and made mistakes and has since reformed. But if he meets his children and still chooses to walk away, that's different. That's current, documented evidence of who he is. The calculation in her suggestion made me uncomfortable, but I also saw the strategic logic. These children deserved a father who cared about them, and if that wasn't going to be Michael, they at least deserved to know he'd been given the chance and chosen to refuse it. I called Veronica Hayes that afternoon and asked what would be involved in arranging a meeting between Michael and the children. She sounded surprised but pleased. Are you saying your husband wants to pursue custody? I clarified quickly. No, but I think he should at least meet them before the state makes any permanent decisions. They deserve to know their father acknowledged their existence, even if he ultimately decides he can't be in their lives. Veronica was quiet for a moment, then said, That's actually very mature of you, considering the circumstances. Most people would just want to distance themselves from the whole situation. She explained the process. Supervised visits in a neutral location, a social worker present, strict protocols to protect the children's emotional well-being. The first visit would be brief, maybe an hour, with Veronica there to facilitate and monitor. If Michael wanted to pursue it further, there would be additional visits, home studies, evaluations. But at minimum, she could arrange one meeting where the children could see their father and ask questions. I should warn you, she added. These meetings can be difficult. The children have been in foster care for 3 years. They've been through trauma. They might be angry or sad or completely shut down. And your husband will have to face the consequences of his choices in a very real, immediate way. I forced Michael to agree to the meeting. Forced is the right word because he fought me on it. Argued that it would just upset the kids and accomplish nothing, that it was better to let them move on with new families. But I told him that if he refused, I'd make sure every detail of his abandonment came out in divorce court, that I'd document his refusal to even meet the children he'd abandoned, and that his character would be publicly shredded. You're going to meet them, I said, my voice cold and final. You're going to look at the 3 human beings you created and left in foster care, and then you're going to live with that choice for the rest of your life. He finally agreed, probably because he realized I meant every word. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 3 p.m. in a Child Protective Services office with neutral furniture and toys in the corner and tissues on every table. Veronica had explained that the children had been told their father wanted to meet them, that they'd been preparing for this with their therapist, that everyone involved was hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. I insisted on being there, not in the room but in the building, because I needed to see this through. Catherine thought it was a bad idea, said I was too emotionally invested, but I didn't care. These children were real. They existed, and someone needed to bear witness to what Michael had done. The children arrived with their foster mother, a woman named Patricia Nguyen, who'd been caring for them for the past 14 months, and seeing them walk through that office door made everything suddenly, viscerally real. Noah was tall for 10, with Michael's dark hair and serious eyes that looked too old for his face. Lily was tiny for 8, wearing a dress that was slightly too big, clutching a worn stuffed elephant. Sophie was 6 and had Michael's smile, though hers was hesitant and unsure, and she stayed close to Patricia's leg like she might need to hide at any moment. They were beautiful and heartbreaking, and I watched them through the window of the observation room while Michael sat in the meeting room looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Veronica did the introductions with gentle professionalism. Kids, this is your dad, Michael. Michael, these are your children, Noah, Lily, and Sophie. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate in. Noah stared at Michael with an expression that was pure judgment, and I could see him cataloging every detail, comparing his memories to the reality in front of him. Lily's grip on her stuffed elephant tightened, and Sophie moved behind Patricia entirely, peeking out from behind her foster mother's legs. Michael attempted conversation. Hi guys, it's nice to finally meet you. The words were so inadequate, so pathetically insufficient, that I felt angry on the children's behalf. Noah's response was immediate and cutting. Finally, we've been in foster care for 3 years. Where were you? Michael flinched. I know. I'm sorry. Things were complicated with your mom, and I thought it was better if I stayed away. Noah stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. You thought it was better if you abandoned us. That's what you mean. You didn't want to deal with us, so you just pretended we didn't exist. Lily started crying quietly, tears running down her face while she hugged her elephant, and Sophie disappeared completely behind Patricia. Veronica tried to redirect the conversation, suggesting they talk about something positive, but Noah wasn't done. Did you get married? He asked, his voice sharp with accusation. Do you have other kids? A new family that's better than us? Michael looked at me through the window, and I knew he was calculating whether to lie. I shook my head slightly, mouthing the word truth, and he took a breath. Yes, I'm married. No, I don't have other children. Lily's voice was small when she spoke, barely audible. Why didn't you want us? It was the question that had probably been sitting in her chest for 3 years, the weight she'd been carrying through foster homes and therapy sessions and nightmares. Michael opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. It wasn't about not wanting you. It was about your mom and the situation being too hard for me to handle. Noah made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Too hard? We were kids. We were the ones in foster care. But it was too hard for you? The meeting deteriorated from there. Sophie never came out from behind Patricia. Lily cried harder, asking questions between sobs about why they'd been left, why their dad never visited, whether they'd done something wrong. Noah sat back down but refused to look at Michael, his jaw set in an expression of protective fury that made him look much older than 10. And Michael sat there taking it, offering weak apologies and weaker explanations, looking increasingly uncomfortable as the reality of what he'd done was reflected back to him through his children's pain. After 45 minutes, Veronica called the meeting, saying the children had had enough, and Patricia gathered them up and took them back to the car while they were still crying or angry or shut down. I met Michael in the parking lot afterward, and he looked shaken in a way I'd never seen. That was horrible, he said, his voice rough. They hate me. Noah looked at me like I was a monster. I felt no sympathy. You are a monster to them. You're the father who abandoned them, who didn't fight for them, who built a new life while they were in foster care. What did you expect? He leaned against his car, and I could see his hands shaking. I thought they'd be fine. I thought because they were young when I left, they wouldn't really remember me, wouldn't care. The delusion in that statement was staggering. They're children who've spent 3 years wondering why their father didn't want them. Of course they care. Of course they remember. Michael looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since this started. What do I do now? The question hung in the air between us. You decide, I said. Either you step up and actually try to be their father, which means supervised visits and home studies and rebuilding trust over years, or you let the state terminate your parental rights and you never see them again. Those are your choices. He chose termination. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed in a way that felt deeper than just anger. He signed the papers 3 weeks later, officially surrendering his parental rights to all 3 children, clearing the way for them to be adopted by families who actually wanted them. Catherine used the meeting documentation in our divorce filing, including statements from Veronica about Michael's lack of engagement and Noah's testimony about abandonment. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Michael's lawyer tried to paint him as a man who'd made difficult choices in impossible circumstances, but Catherine destroyed that narrative with the timeline. She showed that he'd been paying child support for years, meaning he knew exactly where his children were and had chosen not to pursue custody. She showed that he'd ignored 6 months of contact attempts from Child Protective Services. She showed that even after meeting his children and seeing their pain firsthand, he'd still chosen to terminate his rights rather than do the work of being a father. The judge was clearly disgusted, and the settlement reflected that disgust. I got the house, the majority of our shared assets, and permanent alimony because the court found that Michael's financial deception had influenced our entire marriage. But the real consequence came from somewhere I didn't expect. Patricia Nguyen, the foster mother, had connections in the community, and she told people what had happened. The story spread through our town like wildfire. Successful pharmaceutical sales rep abandons 3 children in foster care, lies to his wife for 7 years, refuses to take responsibility even after meeting his kids. Michael's employer started getting calls, questions about whether they knew they were employing someone who'd abandoned his children. His church, where he'd been attending men's group every week, asked him to step down from volunteer positions. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves. The social stigma was overwhelming and inescapable. He moved to a different city 6 months after the divorce finalized, taking a new sales position with a different company, trying to outrun his reputation. But in the age of social media, you can't really outrun anything. Someone created a Facebook post detailing what he'd done, and it got shared hundreds of times. His LinkedIn profile got flooded with comments. Every time he tried to rebuild, someone who knew the story would make sure his new community knew too. I started volunteering with Child Protective Services about a year after everything fell apart. I wanted to do something useful with the knowledge I'd gained, wanted to help other kids like Noah and Lily and Sophie who were stuck in the system waiting for adults to make better choices. I met with Veronica regularly, attended training sessions, learned about trauma-informed care and permanency planning, and the 1,000 ways the system could fail children. Patricia invited me to her house for dinner one evening, and I got to see Noah, Lily, and Sophie in their element, playing in the backyard, laughing over pizza, being kids instead of victims. Patricia told me she was in the process of adopting all 3 of them, that they'd be staying together as siblings, that they were healing slowly but steadily with therapy and stability and love. They ask about their father sometimes, she said, her voice matter-of-fact. I tell them the truth, that he made choices that hurt them, but that his choices don't define their worth. They're working through it. Sophie ran up then, tugging on my sleeve, asking if I wanted to see her drawing, and I followed her inside to admire her artwork, feeling grateful that at least this story had a hopeful ending. The divorce was finalized 18 months after Veronica showed up at my door with that manila folder. I changed my name back to my maiden name, Sterling, wanting no connection to Holloway or the man who'd made such catastrophic choices. I kept working at the law office, got promoted to senior paralegal, started dating someone new who actually understood that honesty was non-negotiable. I still thought about Michael sometimes, wondered if he ever regretted his choices, if he ever thought about the 3 children who carried his DNA but would grow up without him. Veronica told me that Noah, Lily, and Sophie's adoption was finalized on a sunny afternoon in family court, that they'd legally become Nguyens, that they'd been smiling and excited and hopeful. "They're going to be okay," she said. "They've got a good mom now, and they've got each other. That's more than a lot of kids in the system get." I asked if Michael knew about the adoption, and Veronica shook her head. "He signed away his rights. He doesn't get updates anymore. That chapter is closed for them, and honestly, that's probably for the best." I ran into Michael's mother at a grocery store 2 years after the divorce. She'd called me a few times after everything came out, apologizing for her son, saying she'd had no idea about the children or the lies. Now she looked older and tired, and when she saw me, her face crumpled. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "I didn't raise him to be like that. I don't understand how he could do what he did." I didn't have comfort to offer her. "He made his choices," I said simply, "and now he has to live with them." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "He's miserable. He moved again, different city, different job. He can't keep relationships because everyone eventually finds out. His own siblings won't talk to him. His father won't mention his name." She paused. "I know he hurt you, and I know he hurt those children, but he's still my son. And watching him destroy his entire life because he was too much of a coward to face his responsibilities is killing me." I felt a flash of sympathy for her, for the impossible position of loving someone who'd done unforgivable things. But I also felt clarity. "He didn't destroy his life because he was a coward," I said. "He destroyed his life because he abandoned 3 children and lied about it for years. Those are choices. He made them. And consequences are what happen when your choices hurt people." The therapy helped. Dr. Angela Foster specialized in betrayal trauma and had 14 years of experience helping people rebuild after their partner's deceptions. I saw her every other week for 2 years, working through the layers of what had happened. The lies, the financial deception, the realization that I'd built my life on false premises, the complicated grief of losing a relationship that had never actually existed the way I thought it had. "You're grieving a person who never was," Dr. Foster explained. "The Michael you thought you knew was a fiction he created. The real Michael is the one who could abandon his children and lie to you for 7 years. That cognitive dissonance is traumatic." She helped me understand that I hadn't been stupid or naive for believing him, that pathological liars are often incredibly skilled at maintaining their deceptions, that I'd had no reason to suspect he was hiding something so fundamental. "Normal people don't assume their partners have secret children," she said. "That's not a failure of judgment on your part. That's him exploiting your trust." The validation helped, but the scars remained. I found myself hypervigilant in my new relationship, constantly looking for lies, struggling to believe anything without verification. It took years to learn to trust again, to accept that not everyone was hiding catastrophic secrets. The children thrived. I got updates through Patricia, who'd become something of a friend. Noah was in middle school now, playing soccer and doing well academically, talking about maybe becoming a social worker when he grew up so he could help other kids like him. Lily had discovered art and spent hours drawing elaborate fantasy worlds, processing her trauma through creativity. Sophie was in elementary school, bubbly and social, with only occasional nightmares about the past. They all went to therapy, worked through their abandonment issues, built secure attachments with Patricia and each other. "They still talk about their biological father sometimes," Patricia told me over coffee one afternoon. "But it's less about missing him, and more about understanding what happened. They're learning that his inability to be their father was about his limitations, not their worth." That growth, that healing, felt like justice in a way that divorce settlements and social ostracism never could. Michael had tried to pretend these children didn't matter, but they mattered enormously. They were whole people with potential and futures, and they were building lives he'd never be part of because of his own choices. I testified at a Child Protective Services reform hearing 3 years after everything happened. The state was revising policies around parental rights termination, and I was invited to speak about my experience discovering my spouse's hidden children. I stood at a microphone in front of legislators and advocates and told the story plainly. The social worker at my door, the shock of discovery, the meeting with 3 children who'd been abandoned, the aftermath. I advocated for more aggressive outreach to non-custodial parents, for mandatory responses to state contact attempts, for consequences when parents simply ghosted their children in foster care. "Children in the system are already traumatized," I said. "They don't need the additional trauma of parents who can't be bothered to even respond to letters. If someone is going to abandon their children, make them say it explicitly. Make them sign papers acknowledging what they're doing. Don't let them hide behind silence." The hearing resulted in new policies requiring certified mail and mandatory court appearances before parental rights could be terminated for lack of engagement. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and I felt like I'd turned something painful into something useful. Michael tried to contact me 4 years after the divorce. He sent a letter, not an email or text, but an actual physical letter, and the return address was from a city I didn't recognize. The letter was 5 pages long, and the first 3 were apologies and explanations and attempts to justify his choices. But the last 2 pages were different. He'd started seeing a therapist, he wrote, and was finally confronting what he'd done. He understood now that he'd been running from responsibility his entire adult life, that he'd abandoned his children because facing his failures as a partner to Rachel felt impossible, that he'd lied to me because admitting the truth would have required dealing with his shame. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he wrote. Not from you, not from Noah and Lily and Sophie. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, and I'm trying to become a better person, even though it's too late to fix what I broke. He asked if the children were okay, if they'd been adopted, if they were happy. He said he thought about them every day, wondered what they looked like now, whether they hated him or had forgotten him entirely. I gave up my rights to be their father, he wrote, but I can't give up being the person who failed them. That's mine to carry forever. I didn't respond to the letter. I showed it to Dr. Foster, who said it was a sign of growth that he was taking responsibility, but that my obligation to him had ended with the divorce. I showed it to Catherine, who said it was potentially useful if he ever tried to challenge the adoption, but otherwise meaningless. I showed it to Patricia, who read it carefully and then said, "He doesn't get to ease his conscience by asking about them. He made his choice." She was right. Michael had chosen comfort over courage, had chosen his own peace over his children's well-being, had chosen lies over truth. And now he was living with those choices, finally understanding their weight, but too late to change anything. The children were Nguyens now. They had a mother who chose them every day, who fought for them, who showed up. They had stability and therapy and hope for the future. They didn't need updates about their biological father's belated epiphany. They needed to keep healing, keep growing, keep building lives that weren't defined by his abandonment. So I put the letter in a folder labeled Michael Final, and filed it away with all the other documentation from that chapter of my life. Closed, finished, done. I'm 39 now, remarried to someone who understood from day one that honesty was the foundation of everything. We have a daughter together, a bright 3-year-old who asks constant questions and believes the world is fundamentally good because so far, it has been for her. I still volunteer with Child Protective Services, still advocate for foster children, still think about Noah and Lily and Sophie and wonder how they're doing. Patricia sends Christmas cards with photos, and I watch them grow up in annual snapshots, school pictures and birthday parties and family vacations. They look happy. They look loved. They look like kids who've survived trauma and come out stronger, like kids who will grow into adults who understand that families are built through choice and commitment, not just biology. That's the real ending to this story. Not Michael's downfall or my divorce or even the policy changes at CPS. The real ending is 3 children who didn't let their father's abandonment define them, who found a mother worth having, who learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you fail, but that doesn't mean you're unlovable. That's the lesson I carry forward, the truth that replaced all the lies. Worth isn't determined by who fails to see it. Those children were always worthy of love and protection and a real parent. Michael's inability to be that parent was his failure, not theirs. And in the end, they got what they deserved. A family that chose them, a life that valued them, and a future that had nothing to do with the man who tried to pretend they didn't exist. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.